back with another episode of A Pod Has No Name. This week we're covering chapters 34 through 42. With me again this week, back from his vacation, Tom. What's going on, man?
Whew, it's been a hell of a week here, but I'm ready to roll when a pod has
Yeah,
no name.
I mean it's been a hell of a week for me too. I was sick earlier this week. Weather's been funky up here. How was the vacation though? Anything crazy happen?
Whew,
Where did you go?
I went skiing. I was in southern Vermont, and it was my third time skiing ever. I
Now, do
did
you
my,
stay away from the snowboarding completely?
I do.
Yeah, I've also never dabbled with the board. I strictly stick to the skis.
Yeah, it just seems more intuitive.
Yeah, more relaxed, not as hardcore. um, did you? So I guess you got most of your reading done after the vacation.
Yes, all of my reading was done at some point this week prior to this podcast. Whether that was today, yesterday, is your best guess.
Yeah, so I read these much earlier in the week, and 42 I just read today just to have
Mhm.
something fresh for me. But the first chapter we read, 34 and 35 were both pretty kick ass in regards to Kaladin being in the high storm. But let's start off with 34. We find that like Kaladin's outside Ridgefor's barrack, hung up by his feet. He realizes that he's about to be left out in the high storm to be judged by the Almighty, and Sadius himself is the one who sentenced him to that. Laramil, who was the bridge crew's superior, was executed by Sadius himself. Somehow Gaz made it out of this whole ordeal alive and kept his station, and like seems like really nothing happened to him. So good for Gaz for for sticking that one out. Um, but Sadius is really he's about to leave Kaladin out here in the high storm, and the Bridge Four guys are kind of more or less like saying their goodbyes, right? Uh, so I think the main thing that happens in this chapter at the end here is Teft gives him a a sphere, his last
Mhm.
sphere, and as kind of like a good luck charm, I guess. And
Mhm.
Kaladin kind of says to the guys, you know, after the high storm, come out, look up at me, and when I open my eyes, you'll know that I survived. And he tells Syl that this is kind of like more or less a gamble, because if he does end up surviving, well, then the will of the men are kind of at that point become like more or less unbreakable. It's kind of how I took it.
Yeah, yeah. It was also, I think, so. It's interesting. Yeah, the gamble, right? Because he says, if I survive, I'll galvanize the bridge crew. If I die, it's like basically their expectation. So to me, it doesn't seem like that much of a gamble, right? Because
Yeah.
I think like regardless, they were going to go see if their captain was going to survive. So in
Hmm.
my eye, there's only really upside here. Like if he survives,
Yeah, there's nothing
upside.
to
If he
lose for it to be a gamble.
right. Yeah. If he dies, he dies.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that. So yeah, I mean, not much to lose on Kaladin's end. Now it's interesting. We'll get to it for the later chapter, but I mean, in 35 we get like this pretty vivid description of what being in a high storm is like, and it basically what I took from it is that if he wasn't hung up, by his feet, he would have just been like tumbleweed in the wind, basically, just kind of it wouldn't have been a chapter with much like clear description, because he would have been just taken by the wind. It was that seemed like it was meant to be brought up to be like that powerful. You know what I mean? And we've seen people indoors when high storms have come, but this is the first time we've really seen it from the perspective of someone that's in the high storm. Um, so I thought it was a really cool description, and I guess we should talk about this face that appears in the storm, right? This seems like the number one takeaway from me, at least. He's holding onto the roof throughout the whole thing, but there's this moment where this dark face appears in the sky, smiling at Kaladin, and he describes it as inhuman, which to me, I guess, shows like I don't know, like to me, like the type of like he knows it's a face, but the type of face that I guess he's never seen before. Maybe is that kind of how you took it, like something that isn't shaped the way human faces are shaped. And so, what did you think about that, Tom?
Yeah, so the storm itself, it seemed like the love child of Twister and some horrible hurricane, where he's basically flopping in the wind and banging into the top of the roof if he doesn't hold his own and stay strong by holding the ring in which he's tied to. So that was pretty nuts. And the interesting thing is, I don't know if they specifically, I think they do specifically allude to this when he's kind of, and we'll talk about the face as well, but when he's slamming into the roof and he's starting to lose consciousness and he sees this black face, this, this representation of death. Maybe it's like the face of death or the face of these, the void bringers or whomever. And at that time, Stormlight starts to escape from the sphere and starts to heal and protect him basically as he's surviving the storm until the storm passes.
Yeah, so I think we should wait. I think once we after the next Kaladin chapter, let's kind of pause and we'll go back to the storm and talk about it then. Because I have some thoughts involving what happens with Teft next and how it connects overall. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So let's get to that in just a moment. But first, we have a pretty graphic chapter here with Shallan that I wasn't definitely didn't see coming. It starts off pretty normal. Shallan and Jasnah are having a conversation about Gavilar and the Parshendi again, and they're kind of diving a little bit more into why Gavilar would want like anything to do with the Shatter Plains and like why that area in particular held his interest. And
Mm-hmm.
one reason that they mentioned that I thought made sense was that if he knew clearly when he went there, they didn't know that there were Parshendi who were, for one, um, civilized and like cultured, but also that like could fight, form armies, things like that. But then the Chasm Fiends and the Gem Hearts reveal, kind of basically says that by either integrating them into the Alethi kingdom, whether by like annexing and just adding them as like a province, I guess, or going to war, whichever, I guess, the peace treaty that they were going to sign would
Mm-hmm.
give them easier access to gemstones, which obviously helps out longer term. So I thought that that reason alone, made sense from the Alethi standpoint. I wanted to ask you, did you have any takeaways from this conversation on what you think is the motivation from like the Parshendi side to sign that treaty and kill Gavilar, or are you still kind of like me putting the pieces together kind of as we go here?
I still think like it was kind of mutually beneficial to both sides of the agreement,
Hmm.
and that there's some element of a sleeper cell on both sides that wanted to uh, you know invoke chaos to to kind of create this war and to throw off the balance of power. I just feel like because okay, from the Parshendi side to be with the Alethi, like I think the Alethi in general treat the Parshendi as like a lower race.
Yeah.
Um, but they're still getting easier access to the gem hearts, like you said. And then the Parshendi to the Alethi, they're basically getting more respect and getting their voice heard at the table. Um, so it's interesting, unless it's like a long rooted hatred of the Alethi because of this, classism. I do still think there's an element of a sleeper cell on one side or the
Yeah,
other.
I agree 100%, honestly, and I think that is the probably the most likely. The reason it's kind of hard to nail down the Parshendi is because the way that their game plan is, just kind of guarding the outskirts of the plains and going in plateau by plateau, only to retreat back out again. Like we've never seen, it's kind of just war of attrition just until just wear them out until they're done basically. But we
Mm-hmm.
haven't seen any like Parshendi cities, or we haven't seen them in any way really outside of the race to the plateaus. So I think until we understand more about how like they live and their civilization works, it's hard to nail down a reason why one they would want, like what would be beneficial about extending into the outside world more because the Alethi would be connected to Yaakoved, and these other kingdoms. It would make them, I guess, a more connected kingdom overall in Rashar with other like trade treaties and things like that. I would assume,
Mm-hmm.
but without their motivations on killing Gavilar and kind of subjecting themselves to this siege basically. Um, Hard to really answer that question because it seems like a move of desperation, um, especially when you look at the next chapter. You see how they mentioned in their battles like they fight in pairs, and it probably seems like they haven't fought in large scale war before. So it's definitely a gamble on their end to even risk that war. So until we know more about the Parshendi and their civilization and how it works in general, I think it's going to be like really shooting in the dark for their motivations. And I think that's kind of what Shallan and Jasnah, those conversations are getting at. Um, they're not really in the position to make any educated guesses either on it.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that comes to mind is potentially they did this, with the expectation of having a voice at the table or
Yeah,
more political prominence, and then they're realizing that basically the Alethi were just using them for easier access to the gem hearts.
maybe that
So
was
they
it too.
so they wanted to kind of put a stake in the ground and take the claim back on their land, because they obviously have a very different relationship to the gems and the spheres than the Alethi do, where the
Yeah,
Alethi is more like this is like a natural resource that we need to mine to power our fabrials and all our fancy devices. Whereas where the Parshendi, they do have shard blades and shard plates and things like that, and that's important. But I think it's a little bit more of their like religion and ethos.
I also wonder too, and I've been thinking about this. I don't know if it makes total sense, but in my mind, I was thinking like, you have Dalinar who is on the Shattered Plains and is having these visions about the incoming desolation and the heralds and all these types of things, and you have Kaladin who sees this face in the storm and what that may or may not mean. But I was thinking if the Shattered Plains for some reason is going to be like ground zero for a desolation, especially with the Chasm Fiend and Voidbringer connection, even if just by you know translation, like over time, we know that those aren't actually the Voidbringers, but they called them that because it was the most badass thing that they could think of.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder, like, if the desolation would like, if that was already starting deeper in the Shattered Plains, if that would for some reason cause corrupt maybe the Parshendi, and maybe that's why they have like this armor growing out of their skin. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. Maybe just as they say the aluminum cap. But I was wondering if maybe they're being influenced in any way by the like desolation and Voidbringer connection. Because I'd imagine that at some point with the gemstone and the political guesses that the desolation and Voidbringer aspect has to be tied in and weaved in somewhere, right?
Yeah, it's got to have some overarching tie-in, whether it'll be the thing that finally ends the fight between the two sides and has them come to a treaty to fight this greater battle against the
Yeah,
Voidbringers, or like you're saying, like it's it's the secret influence and the secret kind of fire starter of this war and of the end of this treaty in general. I think we have a lot more to read and to figure out to kind of get there and see what that connection is.
yeah, and maybe we'll get more, Shallan and Yasna conversations that shed some light on it. Yasna has definitely been very reserved so far and hasn't revealed much information at all. So as maybe as things get a little more dire in Carbranth, Yasna will start to reveal more information, and later in this chapter, she decides to give Shallan that like first first row lesson on philosophy, where she goes to this seedy part of town with her and baits out these four criminals who were basically robbing people. I guess it was a street that the king couldn't send guards to because the guards were actually corrupt themselves. Is kind of the way I took it, or were paid off by the bandits in some way. And she
Yeah,
killed these four criminals with the soul caster each, and like she turns one to smoke. In all, some pretty creative ways, to be honest with you, um, with the soul caster. Now, what was going through your head here? Because Shallan, I feel like had a very negative and like understandable to like to see it firsthand, but her reaction to it seems like she, I don't know, to me seemed like she undervalued the fact that these were all very bad people that were going to continue to do bad things. Is that
Hmm.
like I don't know? I feel like she had a very negative view of Jasnah after this, and it kind of caught me off guard.
So I think that's how it was initially. Like first reaction, just watching her like brutally kill these people. Two people with
Yeah,
lightning. One person like turned into crystal, and one person lit on fire. Um, which I think might be fair in that moment. But I think as the chapter goes on, and or I don't know if it's in this chapter or the following chapter, and she starts to kind of dig into the philosophical. Let's not even say the philosophical learning. Let's just
yeah,
say the philosophy
philosophy.
of morality and of these different things. She kind of sees both sides of the coin. But there's a point here where we can tell she's so angry and she's so disgusted that she ends up actually doing something pretty significant that we've been waiting for.
Yeah, she makes the swap right as her and Yasna are back in her quarters, kind of discussing the whole thing. She does, it almost seems like her frustration with Yasna for doing what she did is what ended up driving her to make this swap, quickly when she was in the room. Like it almost seemed like if Yasna hadn't put her in that situation and shown her what she had done, then maybe Shallan would have still, kicked the ball, kicked it down the curb and waited for another opportunity. But this kind of forced her hand. It seemed like to me, at least.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on this whole sequence, but I'll share them for when we get to the end of the of
Okay.
Shallan's run in this group of chapters.
All right. Absolutely. So at the end of 42, with the last Shallan chapter, you'll share your thoughts here.
Hmm.
All right. All right. Um, I like that, and we can wrap up both Kaladin and Shallan's arcs, in these set of chapters, and kind of take a turn each talking about each of them.
Hmm.
But that would bring us to 37, which I like. This was a really cool chapter. I've liked all of the chapters so far with the flashbacks. I think they've been revealing, especially now that we're seeing a deeper side of Liren, Kaladin's father. He's a
Hmm.
much more complex character than, initially I would have given him credit for. He's
Hmm.
going to meet Bright Lord Rashon, uh, kind of as like a confrontation on the fact that he's basically like encouraging people to like let them starve and die. Uh, he blames them for not saving the previous Bright Lord, which is the reason why he was sent here in the first place. Um, so Kaladin's father Liren is really just going to stand his ground, and Kal decides to come, and I guess he's at that point where he's like a grown ass man basically, or like beginning to become a grown man, and Liren will certainly accept the help. So
Yeah. Well, so he's
that's kind of
15
how I
here,
took it.
and remember there was a note from one of the redditors earlier in our reading that the years are longer here in the world
It's
of
like a year and
Roshar.
some change.
Yeah, so he's actually more of like a 17. He's like right on the precipice of adulthood. But yeah, this was a
Yeah,
really interesting. I hate to keep overusing the word interesting, but this was a really like complex and a kind of game of mental chess between Liren and Roshan here, um, which was pretty like fantastic. This was actually one of my favorite chapters I think of the book so far.
yeah. Let me ask you this, because there was one point where when he first walks in to confront Rashon, Rashon has another table set up for them to sit at.
Yeah,
And Liren kind of looks at him and says, as being second tier of the non, we are able to have a seat at your table, which he knows is like custom and that Rashon basically can't deny him that. And I think this is, we've seen like the light eyes, dark eyes relationship, and we've heard about these different tiers, but this is the first time that, at least I can remember seeing it in action. And like you said, like that mental chess game, especially with, what is custom and what is not, in relation to now how you have, I guess there's the light eyes and the dark eyes, but dark eyes can, with like academics or prestige, like raise up, I guess not to the point of being a light eyes, but closer to that, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Status? right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I guess like seeing kind of that chess game, I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
Like
And
you
the
said,
other,
not to overuse that word, but like it was the most revealing, I think, on the tiers and kind of how they work. Revealing, I think, is the word I'll go with there.
and certainly just the back and forth dynamic in the like the power plays, right? So Liren understanding exactly what Roshan's doing, Roshan admitting to it, and then basically it gets to the point where they start to negotiate, and Cal is so upset that he basically is sent out of the room, or sends himself out of the room to the kitchen to eat there because he can't handle um, this negotiation basically over his father's life and livelihood that he thinks is completely unfair. So then we get Cal in the kitchen, and then Roshan's son come in. Obviously, going to be a fucking dickhead.
Yep.
Is immediately a dickhead.
He's got his old girl.
And then he's dating his old girl, which
Yeah.
we could have seen a mile away in retrospect. And then he's just trying to treat him like a servant in the kitchen, basically
Basically,
telling him to feed me. He said, "I'm not a servant. I'm a surgeon. Like, I want to make people feel good." And he kind of comes to this realization, like more and more, that he wants to be a surgeon here. But you can still see the hot headedness
yeah.
kind of coming through on our man Kaladin.
It's really cool too to see how he's definitely the hot headedness in adult Kale is definitely there, but you can see how much more of like a measured approach he takes in the present Kaladin chapters, where in these flashbacks you can see how the emotion overrides a lot of the time, and just in terms of like character development, it's cool how it's nice to see Sanderson kind of have that balance between like a younger Kaladin and how he lets those emotions get to him to the point where he gets sent to the kitchen versus present Kale, who's much more calm and reserved and seems at least measured in the decisions that he makes. Right?
Yeah, certainly, certainly. I mean, I think that's normal maturity, that's normal development, and particularly with the position that he's in now as compared to them, kind of being at least then like he might have been in a lower position of power, but there was still some level of class respect and respect between Roshan and but now being just the slave to the slave master, I think he knows like any back
Yeah.
talk is Highstorm City.
Yeah. Yeah. Now
Uh,
the wagon ride back after this
mhm.
confrontation was really fascinating as well because we find out here that Kaladin's dad did in fact steal those spheres, not for malicious reasons, but because the Bright Lord was so kind of like delirious, I guess, in his final days that he wasn't able to make any substantial decisions. So Liren obviously took things into his own hands, for lack of a better term, and stole the spheres, and obviously because of what Rashon is accusing him of, if that gets out, it obviously is in a bad light to the rest of the village and the town. So I think Cal is when he starts to realize the game that Liren is playing, and Liren explains that he was kind of just playing his cards at this dinner, just like playing a game here, and he's going to try to draw a reaction out of Rashon next, right?
Yeah, so he's basically like at this point he knew at the beginning of the day that he was going to try and negotiate. He was going to walk away, and then he's thinking that this is what I'm talking about with this mental chess. Like he's thinking that Rashon at that point is going to be like, oh, I'll just choke him out. I'll just starve him out again. But then we get to the point. But he'll get to the point again where, like in desperation, he'll bring him back in and try to negotiate again, and then Liren
Yeah,
might be in a
exactly. And
position
I
of
guess the
power.
deal will get better every time he's able to last,
And
or
it
at least
seems
his
like, yeah, and the stealing the spears thing, I think it seemed to me that this was involved with Kaladin basically, like like Liren promising Kaladin and through the city lord that he would borrow gems from him to pay for Kaladin to go to surgeon school, to go to
mind.
medical school, which we all know is very expensive depending on those sphere student loan rates.
Yeah.
So that's probably why he stole them, right? Because they were previously promised to him. It was just that the old city lord was completely incapacitated to the point
Yeah,
where he couldn't even remember, his own name, let
yeah,
alone
exactly.
who
I
he's
just
endowing loans
yeah.
to.
Yeah, but that's what I just meant when in terms of like with the accusations Rashon has, if it did come out that it wasn't exactly given to Liren in those final days there, it would obviously have a negative outlook. Now, I also just wanted to mention too, there was at one point when I was reading this chapter, and this is on the wagon ride to the dinner. I forgot to mention this, but Liren is talking to Kaladin, and he mentions how there's been times where he's thought about leaving, just picking up, going somewhere else, be a surgeon in a different town where they don't hate you and don't blame you for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And he's says something more or less to the degree of like, but I've been here a while now, and more or less like these are my people. And I think it's very interesting how Sanderson has kind of written Kaladin to be more or less exactly like his father, in the way that Kaladin couldn't just walk away from Bridge 4, Liren couldn't just walk away from, the people of this town that he's raised a family in. So I thought that was a really great analogy, even though it was somewhat subtle, to show, the impact that Liren has had on who Kaladin himself is. And I think it was definitely shown in that statement there.
Yeah, there's definitely loyalty is on the family crest here.
Yeah,
Um, he can't even well, and it's interesting because I think earlier in the chapter, they allude to the townspeople secretly dropping off food for them so they won't starve.
right.
Uh, which like kind of circles back to like Liren ultimately having trust that the village people will return to his side, um, and kind of be on his side, and that he's just trusting them and has a sense of community and like a sense of himself within this small town, that he has a purpose and a purpose to take care of these people, and that all things will come back to him hopefully.
Yeah, and it's similarly to how Kaladin viewed, his last squad when he was under Bright Lord Amarim's army, and the way he looks at Bridge 4. And it'll be interesting to see how that carries on, because going into books 2 and 3, I expect that if like by the end of this book, I can't see Kaladin continuing to be a bridge crew member. So it'll be interesting to see how that transition works and how he views leaving those men if they don't come with him. Assuming that Kaladin makes it to book 2, who the hell knows what Sanderson has planned for us for the rest of the book.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely something to keep an eye on. Now, at the end of this chapter is when Cal at this point decides to go as Kaladin because he thinks it sounds more adult, more like a man, and basically says that he wants to be a surgeon now and go to surgeon school, both to kind of practice that and be a surgeon, but also to kind of learn how to outsmart and outwit Light Eyes, which is a funny motivation to take out of this dinner with Rashon and his father, but motivation nonetheless, right?
Yeah, certainly an interesting takeaway, and then it kind of brings us back into modern day with Cal.
Yeah, and I thought this description, like they make it kind of seem like it was like a fever dream, and he might not have actually been seeing what is being described to us, but I'm taking for the most part more or less what Sanderson puts in as visions and dreams as more or less being literal. I think is kind of the vibe that I get from these things. And as Kaladin is like laying there in Bridgefort's tent after the men find him, he's basically there's this dream he has where Syl is like on him fending off the death spren.
Mm-hmm.
But like they make the description makes Syl almost sound like they use the word radiant, and I don't know like a radiant blade if they just meant like a bright like sword she had, or if there was maybe like a subliminal connection to like the radiance.
Mm-hmm.
But she's fending off the death spren there, and it's like I kind of took that as like Syl is the only thing. If it wasn't for Syl, he would have been dead at this point. Is that how you took that, or?
So I kind of, but I took it more so like looking at the whole thing and then what's going to happen with Teft here in a few minutes is something else entirely. And basically what that is, that Kaladin must be some sort of chosen one or some sort of, the prince that was promised. Because Spren don't normally have this relationship with people. He
Yeah,
has this ability, we'll see with Teft in a minute, unwillingly and unknowingly to, use Stormlight as a healing agent. He's always been kind of this blessed person where like less people around him are dying. It's almost like in I forget the name of the potion in Harry Potter, but when he drinks the liquid luck where everything just happens to turn out.
yeah,
I, I think like he must be the chosen one. The heralds or the gods or whomever must have some path for him, and there must be some reason for keeping him alive, because I think it's pretty clear that he, with the Sill thing, with the Stormlight, with the survival over time and time and time again, that he has some greater purpose in this world that's been yet to be fulfilled.
yeah, absolutely. And that's why when I was saying like with book 2 and book 3, like he can't be a bridge crew member for the rest of the series, right?
No.
Um, Now, one thing, like, so, they find him outside, right? He opens his eyes, obviously. Teft realizes that, whatever happened with he finds that the sphere wasn't filled with Stormlight. And,
Mm-hmm.
he obviously has some questions at that point because he had given it to him and it should charge in the storm. So he now comes into the room with Kaladin laying there. He um, takes, guard watch for watching over him, and he has 3 spheres that he saved up that are all charged. And he mentioned something about the Envisagers,
Mm-hmm.
and how something about how he rejected them. Now, Sanderson does a good job of having POV characters kind of reflecting their thoughts without revealing what the whole thought is.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, they like through Tef's eyes, he obviously has the context of what these guys are, but as the reader, you do not. Which I think is a good and interesting device to like slowly piece things together and add clues. Um, but I guess from what I can gather, probably like some group of people that believe in like healing power of Stormlight, and he puts the spheres in Kaladin's hands, and he absorbs the Stormlight out of them, and it kind of heals himself. So I have a lot of thoughts from this. Um, Originally, when I first read this, I thought that maybe the Envisagers that Teft is talking about were people who can use Stormlight to heal other people, and
Mm-hmm.
that he rejected them, but for some reason he was able to still heal Kaladin. Now, in hindsight, I'm thinking the first sphere healed him as well when he was just out in the storm and Teft wasn't there. So
Right.
maybe Kaladin is an Envisager.
Yeah, it might be more like Taft didn't believe that they were real or true, and that whatever the word is, would you say Effersigers
Envisagers is
and
how. Yeah, we'll need help from,
Enversagers?
from the guys we'll need help from the redditors on the pronunciation of some of these ones. But
Um, that might just be some term that's used specifically, like with the Horn Eaters, to describe something that we might find as more universal and might have a different term for the Alethi and whatnot. It might just be someone who has the ability to naturally heal and
yeah, we're
heal
that.
others with Stormlight.
Now, my next thought, and this is where shit kind of gets off the rails. In the prologue, no, I'm sorry, the prelude with Seth, he has that ability to suck in Stormlight and do all types of crazy shit with it. Do we think Kaladin is kind of does Kaladin have the same type of abilities that Seth has, just untapped and untrained, regarding the Stormlight? You think?
Yeah, that could be part of it as well. That's a good potential guess. I mean, did we see Seth do any healing with the? But we know he can use the Stormlight
But
to
he can
to.
absorb it. Like he can absorb it and kind of bend it to his will.
Right, right, right.
So a little bit different, but that's what I kind of meant by untapped and untrained. Um, like Zeth kind of knows how to, use it and tap into it, whereas Kaladin has, obviously no idea. But for some reason here, he is able to absorb it for healing purposes. I don't know. I think it's a little food for thought, and would maybe set up a future like Stormlight versus Stormlight, Kaladin versus Seth type battle, which could be crazy. Um, but we'll see what happens as we get more information here. I imagine now that Kaladin is up and at 'em, and Teft seems to know, something about it, if not a lot. We'll eventually get that information out of Teft through Kaladin in the POV. I would imagine.
I would hope
Hopefully,
so. I would hope so. I'm excited for it.
yeah. So that brings us to 39, and this is another Shallan chapter where so at this point she has the Soulcaster, right? And Jasnah either hasn't noticed the switch has been made or is kind of just acting like everything is fine, despite it not being so. I was also thinking that maybe Jasnah can just use one broken gemstone is like not like she can just fix it, maybe. um, and that it just hers still works and Shallan's just doesn't. Like maybe the gemstone had nothing to do with it. Um, that's just kind of a thought that I had. But either way, Shallan is, not under any immediate danger right now, despite making the swap. Um, do you think Jasnah knows that that
Yes.
a switch has been made, whether or not by Shallan, but just at all?
My theory is that she read Shallan like a book this whole time.
Yeah.
She like knows who she is. She knows what she's after, and like she's still trying to, like maybe she sees that their family like are bad people, and she's trying to elevate her out of that, and she's playing this game. Like I don't even think like the possibility of Yasna switching the soul. Oh my god, I'm blanking on the name.
Soulcast.
Soulcaster. Thank you. I think there's a possibility that she might have switched the soul casters prior to that, and she was basically goading her to steal the other one back just to see if she would do it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I,
I'm not
I feel
ruling any
like
of that.
I feel like Yasna is too smart and Shallan is too naive for her to really have pulled this off this
Yeah.
very
I
first
agree
time.
100%. I'm with you all the way. And it's funny too because from Shallan's POV, like you get her like reactions to it. But I feel like if we did have a Yasna POV, it would just basically be her seeing right through her all of the time.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I think similarly. Now in this chapter though, Shallan and her brothers talk through the brothers, through that same excuse me, through that same kind of device that
Mm-hmm.
Yasna and Dalinar had used. Um, they decide basically Shallan is going to stay a few more weeks, kind of just try to get attention off of her trail because if she were to leave right away after it disappeared, then it pretty obviously looks like she's the one that stole it. Um, and also that while staying, she can research how to use it while she has access to the library and things of that nature.
Yeah, and like
But the brothers
all those ideas were hers, and it's pretty clear that her brothers might be kind of not on the smarter side of things.
the brothers basically seem useless, right?
Yeah, not the sharpest tools in the shed.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're basically saying that like time's kind of running out here and that it's like, 3 or so weeks at the most until you have to definitely leave and bring it back. So, yeah, it definitely seems like Shallan is, the Devar's last hope and hurrah here. Now, at this point, she tries toying around with it. She's not able to get it to work. A couple simple things, and it's basically not as simple as like point and shoot as Yasna showed in the alleyway with those four criminals, right? Not as simple as that. Now, we'll save our thoughts for 42 when we get to the last Shallan chapter for her overall. But let's wrap up Kaladin's little arc here because couple interesting chapters here. Chapter 40. Kaladin wakes up and he thinks that it's been weeks, maybe months. sees the men with Rock and Teft and Moash and some of the other guys running around the courtyard doing their drills, and he's shocked to discover that he was only out for 10 days and
Mhm.
that he's walking again after 10 days, which is, obviously like miraculous. And, basically you have Teft kind of standing there awkwardly, and, men have kind of been, even soldiers have like been coming to see, um, like the Bridge 4 now that they realized that Kaladin had lived, to see if he would, survive his injuries after the high storm.
Mhm.
And, really, kind of on Teft, when he first gave him the gemstones, he made it seem like, all right, we'll do like one or two every couple days so he heals slower, make it seem kind of normal. And clearly, either he overdid it or just the healing effects he completely underestimated. Because however he tried to do it, it did not work the way he planned, I don't think.
No, it seems like it seems like he kind of, well, he's a horn eater, so he might not be the brightest bulb in the bunch. So he might have overshot the math here on this.
Well, that's Rock. This is Teft.
Uh,
I think Teft would have just, I don't know, man.
I don't know. Might be just a group of
Yeah.
not the
Once
smartest
you
guys. They're doing algebra in the dust outside the cabin, trying to figure out the equation, and
yeah.
probably just missing the mark.
Yeah, I hear that. And he did say that he rejected the Envisagers. He didn't stick around to listen to like how exactly it worked.
Right.
So the oversupply that he gave Kaladin there, I mean, it's only expected. It's better than, undersupply, right?
That's right. That's right.
Now, Kaladin kind of gets weaseled into going on a bridge run here, which is crazy. Um, but Lopin, who we, our favorite new Bridge 4 member, is on water duty, and he brings Kaladin with him to help carry the water. And when they get to the battle, there's a real interesting part here where, because Kaladin isn't with the bridge crew because he's, just getting up from surviving a high storm, him and the, other bridge crew guys are kind of just hanging out and watching, the battle while they wait. And he makes a couple key observations, I think. Kaladin, we mentioned it earlier, but he notices that the Parshendi, they fight in pairs, which to him says that they never fought in large scale war before,
Hmm.
and that, they're probably more accustomed to like smaller skirmishes. And again, the way he describes it makes me think that the Alethi are definitely supposed to be like the Roman like legions, the way, they're kind of said to fight in like a really organized and like thought out process.
Hmm.
Um, so I was wondering how this might connect to Shallan and Jasnah's conversations on like the motivations of them. As what I was saying earlier, how it kind of would be a gamble for them to risk war with the Alethi unless they had to for whatever reason, unless they were just completely ignorant to like how the war would be fought, maybe.
Yeah, that could be it. But I do think it might speak to their desperation. I
Yeah,
think that's kind of a sound way to look at it.
yeah, it's just the reasons for that desperations is what's clouded in fog right now. But we'll
Hmm.
get there eventually. We're things are being revealed here at starting to get more clues here at a bit more of a quicker pace. Um, Now at this point is when Kaladin kind of does realize though that the whole time he's kind of been trying to look at a way he can make Bridgman useful for Sadius, to kind of like not draw his ire. And at this point is when he kind of has the realization that like the whole reason for having Bridgman is for them to die. So by doing anything other than that, it's messing up the rest of the army's plans. Um, which is a tough pill to swallow. And how do you give these men like a reason to live and go on these bridge runs if there isn't even any hope? Like if your only job is to die, that's like what the hell are you gonna do?
Yeah, I'm
Um,
still holding on to Dalinar saying that he was going to try one bridge crew, and that he's going to be so impressed by Bridge Crew 4 that they're going to rise above the fold here.
yeah, I am. I can't wait to get to part 4 to see if we can go back with Dalinar and Adolin, or even in part 5, um,
Hmm.
to see how all that plays out, because I agree. It did sound like he was like it when he did say that. It almost seemed like destiny that it would be Bridge 4 that goes with him, right?
Right.
Now we're also introduced. We might have been introduced to him before, but he never, said anything meaningful. But Sigil, who seems like he's pretty knowledgeable on the Parshendi and some of their ways and culture. I hope we get more conversations with him in the future, just to kind of reveal those types of things. Um, Now they go back to camp at this point, and him and Kaladin are talking while Rock and the rest of the men are like around the campfire preparing for like stew that night. And he says that like originally he really disliked Kaladin at first, because he thought that he was kind of giving them fool's gold, but he sees now the benefits of what like a false hope can give. And I think it was really interesting to hear that from Kaladin's perspective, because he definitely always thought that it was real hope. He
Hmm.
never, I don't think he ever looked at it as false hope, or what the benefits of false hope could be, because he looked at it as like genuine hope, like I'm going to get these guys out of here, or like we're going to survive. um and we're at the point now where, at the end of this chapter, Kaladin sounds like he's pretty close to like being the guy that almost, went to the honor chasm again, right?
Yeah, yeah, he's kind of contemplating that himself. Like, is he returning to that person that was so depressed that he was on the almost at the point of giving it all up?
Yeah. Now I was like, I finished reading this chapter, and I was like, man, like I'm really feeling down at this point, because Kaladin's feeling down. I thought he was going to come back after telling the guys to like, come outside and I'll open my eyes and be alive. Thought he was going to like really lean into it at that point. And I was worried at the end of this chapter, but then I read the next chapter, and my fears were kind of uh, quenched. I'm much more confident in Kaladin going forward now after this chapter, and I'll say why when we get to the end of the chapter.
Okay.
Um, so it starts off with Kaladin going in, and he's into the castle, and Liren is working on Relir and Rashon and his son. They've been badly wounded hunting White Spine. Not sure what that is. Something involving Tusk, obviously.
Yeah, I think it was those creatures, the drawings at the beginning of the chapter, just like some sort of
Yeah,
Pokemon looking elephant monsters.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, like at this point, Laurel is like she's either wedded to Relir or married to Relir. I forget which one, but she sees him all mangled and is like immediately escorted out.
Hmm.
Um, he's kind of like half of his face, it seems like, is falling off. His eyeball, I think his one eyeball is gone, and there's a ton of his legs. I think the one leg is really torn up. And Rashon, I think they make it seem like just the one thigh, like the one leg, is where his damage is. So he's in much better shape than his son. And after Liren tries doing some work with the son, he basically decides that he's like past the point of saving. He's so wounded and injured that he's going to die, and there's nothing that he can really do to save him. And he mentions that he has these three kind of rules, which he lists to Rashon when he demands that he helps his son. And the third one, which overrides the other two, is that if somebody is past the point of saving, then you must spend your energy to save, who can be saved,
Hmm.
which would then be Rashon. So he gives them a little bit of what's basically like laughing gas to knock him out,
Hmm.
and does the same thing for the son to just kind of let him die peacefully. And there's a moment here where he's going to stitch together a wound, but he could cut an artery and basically just let Rashon die. Um, and he passes up on that chance. And later in the chapter, after he saves Rashon, him and Liren and Kaladin are speaking, and he kind of just mentions that he did think about it, but even if Kaladin wasn't there, Liren would not have let him die, because that's just not who he is. He's a surgeon. He saves people, and from his point of view is that he wants to be better than how like the Bright Lords act, just not like to condemn and let people die. For example, he just let two people lay out in the field, who were injured as well, and basically condemn them to death. And basically that he just wants to be better than them, and that by saving him, he kind of sticks to his code and his morals that way. And Kaladin, I think, in his head kind of comes to the conclusion that if it were him, he would have killed him because some people just need to be killed, he says. And to me, this is setting up Kaladin versus Sadius. You know,
Mm.
Kaladin realizes that Sadius is the type of person who's going to just condemn bridge crews to death. And that, you know, that line, some people just need to be killed, I think is just Sadius in a nutshell. So if this isn't foreshadowing for Kaladin versus Sadius at some point, you know, I'll take the loss, but I'm willing to, if we're continuing that game and placing the bet, I'm putting a full 10 on Kaladin versus Sadius happening.
Okay, okay. I kind of like that. I was thinking like it more so predicts like Kaladin's turn to being a soldier. Like this is what like they both kind of have the same philosophies, but this streak of anger or spite, or not even anger or spite, just like the like taking it one step further and killing him, I think is what kind of separates him and makes him a soldier. The other interesting thing here, this kind of draws a parallel to Rashawn being angry at Lirin earlier for allowing the city lord to die, so he had to come to this place. And now, in his mind, I think he's going to punish Lirin again for allowing his son to die.
Yeah, well, this whole time I thought that Kaladin was going to go off to be like before the last flashback chapter. I thought that Kaladin was going to go off to be a soldier, and that something was going to happen to his family while he was gone. That's why he thought that he had failed Tien. Now, what I'm starting to the vibe I'm starting to get now is that at some point he is going to go to Carbranth and study, and that's why he's so, or maybe he doesn't even make it to Carbranth, but like the way it's happening now is that Rashon is going to act, like something's going to happen to the family regarding Bright Lord Rashon, and that's going to reinforce why he hates, you know, Bright Lord so much. It's going to reinforce maybe, you know, how he, like why he thinks he failed Tien and became a soldier, because his family that he was going to become a surgeon for was maybe either killed by Rashon, or, you know, their life was made hell. You know, clearly Rashon is going to exact revenge somehow, right?
Yeah.
Now, do you remember back when in the first chapter, I think was it Ken Sen, the first chapter when he's like a soldier and he gets put into Kaladin's like squad. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think it was the first chapter of the actual book.
Yeah, the first chapter of the actual book. At the end of the chapter, when Dalit and him and like his unit dies, before he does that, he goes off to fight a Bright Lord. And I was, I doubt it's Rashon, but thinking about it, I was like, I wonder if Rashon is still alive. Um,
Mm.
but we'll see. I don't know. He seems like Rashon seems like he was older when this happened, and I don't think Kaladin is older than like 23. So it's not. I think like what did the flashback say? 5.5 years ago.
Uh,
So, you know, I think he could be still alive, but because, especially with the wound and everything, I don't know if he would be on a battlefield. So maybe it wasn't him, but I did have that thought that, oh shit, like maybe Rashon is alive and that's the Bright Lord that he went after in that chapter. Um,
well, maybe it's like, or like, let's take it, more like less literally. It could be like in that moment, like because of the way that Bright Lord has been treating him and his father, that he like finally took it all out on him there.
yeah, that
Like
too.
whether it's the
That too.
exact person or not.
Yeah, just when he sees a Bright Lord on the battlefield, he's going to bring it.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that. I hear that. Now, that leads us up to our. Do you have any other thought? That wraps up Kaladin for this week. Did you have any other overall thoughts on Kaladin and his arc before we move on to Shallan?
Again, it's getting more like the prince who was promised.
Yeah.
The hero's journey, all these classic kind of story cliches and tropes. We're following that arc. I just want to see where we tip the scales and have him kind of be a larger player on the chessboard.
Yeah, and I honestly think so. Here's my guess: as I think at the end of this book, it's going to end with Kaladin versus Sadius, and then book two is going to be like where Kaladin becomes like a power player.
Okay. Okay.
So that's how I see the arc going. We'll see if I'm right, but if I had to take a stab at it, that's what I would say. Now that brings
Okay.
us to chapter 42. Um, Pretty interesting chapter. It seems like a lot happened here, but like nothing that is like super substantial. Like a lot of little things it seemed like happened. It starts off with Shallan, after Jasnah tells her to kind of like takes this philosophical homework and tell her, whether or not what she did in that alleyway with the criminals and the Soulcaster was, right or moral or ethical. And she decides that it was legal and that it was right, but that it was unethical and immoral. Um, which I don't study philosophy, but that seems like a oxymoron to me. I don't know. I don't want to dive into the semantics of the whole thing, but but I do. The more I read Shallan, the more I just think I dislike her and like Jasnah. That
Okay.
it's hard for me to root for Shallan and her family while reading. And it's like her, she interacts with Cabzal, and I kind of don't like Cabzal, Cabzal either. And it's this whole every time I'm like through 42 chapters, I'm at the point where I'm like firmly team Jasnah and anti Shallan. I think.
I kind of like Shallan. I think she's got a certain innocence to her, though. A little weird here, later in the chapter between her and Kabzal. Things
Yeah,
are
it was
heating up.
a little bit strange. Now here's my my theory with Shallan is that by like the third book she'll be so like she's like naive and young right now, but by the third book she'll be like become hardened and will look at the world maybe a little bit differently than how she looks at the world now, and maybe like Jasnah is kind of like sculpting that out of her. And that like you're supposed to like kind of think she's annoying right now because she's going to eventually be molded into like a more hardened character, which I would like and I would appreciate that arc and the work that Sanderson would put into it. But right now, I just can't help but think that Shallan is annoying, and like I just want her to just fail. I want Jasnah to just catch her. I want Jasnah to go and be with Dalinar and worry about the Voidbringers and stop worrying about.
I think she already has. I mean, I think she already has caught her, and I think this is all part of
Yeah.
Yasna's plan to have an educated underling.
Now, so this is really interesting, and this is like I like when there's been a lot of times in the Shallan chapters where there's been like a minor thing that's happened, and then like she just kind of because of her studies and stuff, like she isn't able to reflect on it, and that like kind of takes your mind off of it as the reader. But just to go back on it, like she's given free time here because of this, philosophical homework she had, and she spends her free time with the Soulcaster trying to make it work. But there's at one point she's like in her room alone doing this, and there's a whisper of "Who are you?" And so like between which is like there's a maid outside of the door, and she kind of convinces herself that it was this maid, but it definitely wasn't the maid, right? So like in thinking of how this connects to the demons from the picture when she drew the king of Carbranth, and the face that Kaladin saw in the sky and the visions that Dalinar has, there's some type of overall connection. I don't know of like a greater power or if these are just like spirits and demons. Um, but definitely like maybe some prophecy involved, or something regarding, because the Radiance more not the Radiance, the Heralds more or less seemed like they were agents of like a
Hmm.
almighty or like of a divine, and that they were just kind of like the foot soldiers, the 10 heralds, without being like almighty themselves. But maybe I'm wrong in my reading of that, but it seems like there's some sort of overall connection, I think, between all of these things, at least if I had to guess.
Yeah, I think it might have been the Soulcaster whispering.
Oh, speaking to her.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, I like that. And maybe you use the Soulcaster by like having a conversation with it.
Like in your own head or something.
Yeah, like you have to learn to like learn its language, maybe almost. Not
Hmm.
language, but like how to like communicate with it.
Hmm.
Oh, I like that. I think we're on to something there. Now, Shallan gets a maid in trouble here. Sends her to tell Yasna that she accidentally cleaned the room. And
That's
while
on
she's
purpose
doing
though,
it,
so she can have some time to snoop.
I think that was probably the smartest play that she's made, perhaps.
Thus far.
Yeah, like one of the smarter plays that she's made. So hats off to Shallan there. She finds a lot of research regarding the Voidbringers here. Not in the I don't know if she was not like pissed off, but she seemed a little flabbergasted that somebody who would like reject, the heralds and like the religion of the Alethi, and Rashar, but be so invested in like all these like books and research on like the Voidbringers that people kind of disregard as myth is, I wonder how we'll see. Like I imagine, like like the Desolation and the Voidbringers is obviously like more or less kind of like to me how in Game of Thrones you had like the looming. You knew that the White Walkers were going to come eventually, and like right now that's not what's the primary concern, but you knew eventually the White Walkers were going to come, and same way with in this, like that eventually like the Voidbringers and the Desolation is going to be like the primary antagonist. It's just not right now. So seeing how all of that relates into Shallan, it'll be interesting because she seems probably like the most religious character um that we can see, right? Other than maybe Dalinor, who seems more recent, and his is he believes in all these other things too. So it will be interesting to see how that like shakes her character up.
Yeah, I think I will. I had 2 points. One
Yeah,
was I agree that her like naivety and, and all that, like whenever all of this goes down, or whenever the more and more she's around Yasna, I think the more and more she'll turn down the heretic path. And then the other thing is, do we remember if these notes that we're reading here were the epigraphs in earlier chapters
yeah.
about the
So
Voidbringers?
I wanted to mention that too. So the notes that she finds here are they're Yasna's notes, at least in part three.
Okay.
Not the part two ones were the stories, kind of like we thought they were maybe from different characters of Sanderson's works outside of this particular trilogy.
Hmm.
The first ones, they were other hand accounts, but in part three, it does seem like it's all Yasna's notes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So
Cool.
that leads into the awkward picnic where Cabsel basically says he's going to give up being an Ardent for her, which came, a bit out of nowhere. And it's interesting, like it's interesting how Shallan continues to like refute. Like she says how like this is going too far. Should definitely tell him that I'm going to be leaving eventually, but like she never tells him that. She never tells him that. Um, she keeps kind of stringing Cabsel along here. Now she asked him there was a point where she was going to do a few different things. There was like she was weighing maybe she should ask like the king for help or protection against Jasnah having the soul caster. And then one of the other things she was weighing maybe doing was just asking Cabsel what he knew about it, why he would maybe want to steal it, and if he knew how to use it. So she asked him how he can use it, and he gives a way that she's already tried, and she knows it doesn't work. So at that point, like I wonder if that makes him like now that he can't help her with the soulcaster at all. I do wonder if we'll see how that relationship goes now, because it seemed like she had at least had a reason before, whereas now she knows that she's going to be leaving soon. He can't help with the soulcaster. I'll be interested to see how the Shallan Capsule relationship goes from here now.
Yeah, I still think there's like some juice there. There's some love in the air, and I think might supersede all of that. But it
Do
was
you
kind of
trust
interesting.
Capsule?
I do. I think he was set up to set her up to steal the Soulcaster, like he kind of got at. But I trust him in the way that I think he's blind with affection for Shallan, and
Okay.
that she basically has control over him at this point in the story. And whether she loves him back or not, she can use him as a pawn.
Yeah. Yeah. I just don't see how. Like it seems like maybe her house will just crumble before she can even get on the boat, and maybe she just won't leave at that point, or maybe he'll keep her from staying or keep her from leaving,
Mm-hmm.
so that she can't go back. But either way, whether it's with her and Cabsel, her and her family, or with her and Yasna, like at least two of those three are going to end in disaster.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? So
yeah. I'm leaning more towards the house.
the house, yeah, yeah. Maybe, maybe that does seem like the most likely at this point, because at the end of this chapter, she gets a notice that she has 1 week basically before the ship that had brought her to Carbranth is going to be back to take her back to her estates, and what she basically says is, I have one more week here, but like while I'm here for this week, I'm going to continue to. I think the word they used was pretend, which is just kind of like pretend like she's studying as a philosopher, and all of these outside troubles with her house and uh, other things aren't really actually happening. So we'll see. The next Jasnah chapters will probably take place between then and the week when she has to leave. So we'll see
Mm-hmm.
how that continues to unfold. Now, one thing that Cavsel mentioned in this chapter was that stealing a soulcaster would definitely maybe start a war between Yaakaved and Elethkar, which she kind of doesn't really seem to dwell on as much as I'd imagine somebody would for who was stealing the soulcaster. Did you think that too, or am I maybe just thinking too much into that one?
That potentially, like, if someone were to steal this, yeah, I mean, I guess that's an interesting point. I don't think it's probably more so that she's not aware of the consequences of doing such a thing, as
Yeah,
opposed to like her having that intention in mind. I think she's just ignorant to it.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Now, I also wanted to mention too, like overall, well, let's just say this overall with her arc, what happens in this next week of story time here is really going to tell us a lot about her. Whether between Kabzal, Jasnah, and what was the third thing that I said before? It's Kabzal, Jasnah, and going back
Her
to her house. Like it
homeland.
seems like at least two of those three things, if not all three, are going to like end in disaster. And she's the ball is really going to start rolling with Jasnah, where like she's going to be in some type of danger. I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think next week we can definitely probably say a lot more about where her arc is going. Like at the end of this book, I can say where I think Kaladin's going to be, but I'm really kind of lost. Not lost, but like I can't quite place my finger on what I think Shallan is going to be doing in 300 pages or 500 pages. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, me as well. Me as well. I don't know where we're going with her. I think that's what we got the rest of part three here to really sort this out and
Yeah.
figure out exactly where these characters are going. I think I've said this at the end of each and every part that this is we're going to figure out what the arc is, but I do really think we're kind of getting to the the point of no return here.
Yeah, and I think too. I think parts 4 and 5 are going to answer a lot of questions that we have, but I'm also expecting them to pose just as many. You know what I mean? For every question that gets answered, I would imagine part 4 and 5, another one is going to take its place. As
Right.
we head into like as we start to look ahead towards the second book and closing up book one. So that'll be interesting. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about before we get into the epigraphs for these chapters was we know that soulcasters are typically used for like building or supplying food, water, things of like supplies. We saw Jasnah use the soulcaster to like kill people, and I'm wondering like I'm just wondering if there armies out there. Do you think that have like shard bearers, and they also have people who use soul casters as like offensively in war,
Mm-hmm.
or do you think like it's is that like taboo? Are they only supposed to use it for like creating and destroying, like creating things?
I think it might be taboo, but I think you might be right on both accounts, right? Where it could be taboo, but at the same time, there's probably people out there who are saying "fuck the taboo."
Right, but I would imagine like if you brought one into like if you brought a soulcaster to like fight a chasm fiend, and if you touched the chasm fiend with it, could you just turn the chasm fiend like into ice? If it even it was though it's that big, you think?
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I mean we're gonna have to. I need to see this used in a much greater fashion. What if imagine if Shallan is the one to become like the soulcaster user and like use it in the like battle? Like in like by the time the
Uh,
second and third book. Would that surprise you? Because I would be shocked.
yeah, I would be pretty shocked.
I would be pretty
It's not.
shocked.
I see her more as a intelligence information type of person as opposed to
Yeah,
someone who's in the center of the action.
right. I'm with or like a master manipulator.
Right.
not right now, but like maybe that's where her arc goes. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, maybe under some Jasnah tutelage. We'll see though. We'll see. Now let me pull up. That does it for the readings we did this week. Now we'll get to what we'll be reading for next week, but I did just want to go over the epigraphs first. Um,
Okay, because I was thinking the other thing we could consider is if when we finish part four, kind of reviewing them as a whole, because I thought that was a pretty interesting experience in retrospect.
yeah.
But really up to you the direction you want to go here.
I think we should let's do both.
Okay, okay,
Let's do
cool.
it as we go, and then we can look back as a whole and see if maybe anything is a little bit more enlightening.
Okay.
Now we had the first one was um, 34. I walked from Abamabar to Urathuri. This is a quote from the eighth parable of the Way of Kings, which is the book that Dalinor is reading. Now we know that Urathuri is this like forbidden, not forbidden, but like lost city. Maybe like I kind of compared it to maybe like Rashar, Atlantis, kind of.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, I think we talked about that a little bit last week, but there's a few more that kind of mention that. The next one, for example, though many wished Urathuri to be built in Alethala, it was obvious that it could not be, and so it was that we asked for it to be placed westward in the place nearest to honor. So that strikes out. At first, I was thinking maybe that this city was going to be in the Shattered Plains, but the Shattered Plains seem like they're southeast um, of Alethkar, and to the west. Let me see. Let me pull up the map. I was looking at it when I first read it. The map shows that Shinovar is all the way to the west, which we were reading is like the most fertile place in Rashar. So now I'm thinking, maybe it's in Shinovar. Um,
Potentially, but it could be similar to Game of Thrones, where right we only know Westeros, and there could be an Essos and a whole other plot of
oh
land
right,
that's
yeah,
completely
for sure.
undiscovered.
For sure. And maybe like, maybe that's where the Voidbringers went, right? Maybe it's not just, this continent. Um, so that's certainly something that's on the table at the very least. Now the next epigraph was taking the Dawn Shard, known to bind any creature, voidish or mortal, he crawled up the steps crafted for heralds, 10 strides tall apiece, toward the grand temple above. Now it says the next part of the note says that there's no modern explanation of what a dawn shard is. You would imagine it's somewhat related to like shard blades, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's known to bind any creature, voidish or mortal. Maybe it like when it says bind, I think what comes to me is either it like you can control the will of that being, or you can like absorb its soul, maybe. And the steps crafted for heralds, 10 strides tall apiece towards the grand temple above. I was thinking maybe is that like the city Urathiri and this person is heading up there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I would assume this is a herald going up there too, but maybe I
Yeah,
could be
that makes
wrong
sense.
about that.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean it's the steps are crafted for heralds, right? Um, now the next one was born from the darkness, they bear its taint still, marked upon their bodies much as the fire marks their souls. This one was really confusing. Didn't really know what that meant at all. Um, Maybe some Voidbringer stuff. Like
Yeah.
they're like not like the Voidbringers themselves, but those like dark shadows that Dalinor was fighting in the vision. Maybe is what I was
Mm-hmm,
thinking.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Repeat it one more time so I can get another.
Born from the darkness, they bear its taint still, marked upon their bodies, much as the fire marks their souls. So whatever it is that's marked on them, whatever that taint is, um, it's somewhat related to like the Voidbringers or something, right?
Yeah, it sounds very similar to what Dalinar was facing in his vision. I think that's a good pickup.
Yeah, like those dark figurines is kind of what I was thinking as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, the next one is within a heartbeat, a Lezarv was there, crossing a distance that would have taken more than 4 months to travel by foot. So whoever Elizarv is, it's another folk tale. This one recorded in Among the Dark Eyed, stories of instantaneous travel and the Oath Gates pervade these tales. So maybe there's like portals that like were deactivated, like in the time of the Heralds and the Radiants. Maybe they had like portals that have since lost its power, or maybe he just had like a super amped up style of shard armor, shard plate that could like make him move literally that fast.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
again, like
Yeah.
these things, they're folk tales, so like I wonder like how much we have to take with a grain of salt. Like I wonder how much of it is like I'm assuming all of these have hints of truth, but I wonder how much of it Sanderson is exaggerating as like folk tales over time tend to be.
Yeah. Yeah. It could be like different interpretations of the same thing and of something we're about to experience for the first time. This like higher being, I think it's all kind of alluding to this greater war, this greater end game that we're kind of arriving
Exactly.
at.
Exactly. And keep in mind, these are all from Jasnah's notes where she's studying Voidbringers and Desolations. These are all quotes from the notes. So, like the last two, Death upon the lips, Sound upon the air, Char upon the skin, from The Last Desolation by Ambrian. And then the last one, like a high storm, regular in their coming, yet always unexpected. The word desolation is used twice in reference to their appearance. So, it's basically saying that desolations, like high storms, are always going to come, yet whenever they do, it's unexpected. And I think that's maybe it's interesting. I think it's cool that we ended at chapter 42 because I think that's like the perfect epigraph to end on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we know, like I was saying earlier, like we know that the desolation is coming. There's just all these other things regarding Kaladin and Dalinar and Shallan right now that are kind of distracting us until the desolation comes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but every week on the pod, we're definitely going to talk about the wider scope and have a longer room because that's the main thing. And I think trying to pick up on like the clues and the hints every week has probably been one of my favorite parts about doing the podcast. So we're certainly try to keep doing that more as we find more about the what the desolation actually is, and though unexpected, like the epigraph says, maybe when we think it'll happen, and which characters will be involved in it.
I think we're
Anything
getting to
else
that
to add
place.
regarding that?
No, no, I think we're getting to that place. We're moving in that direction.
Yeah, I agree. Now we're currently on page 693, which starts chapter 39. Um, Now
I
we
know we
still
finished that.
have
Aren't
we
we on
still have two.
740 something?
Well, you might have a different edition than me.
Okay, because we finished 44. We finished 42, right? So what's the end
Yeah,
of
we.
42?
Oh, you're right. I was wrong bookmark. We're at 747. So there's 150 pages until we finish part 4. Should I would like to do a pod right at the end of part 3 so that way we can just, talk about kind of part 3 as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Should we just do a long episode next week, you think, and go up to 897, or do you want to split it in half?
I think time permitting with my schedule right now, I might have to split it in half.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, we could always, whenever we're able to get them all done, is when we can get the episode out. But
mhm. Okay, so I mean,
what
whatever
chapter do
direction.
you think would alternatively be?
I don't have my book in front of me.
Okay, that's no problem. Um,
Just make the call and I'll do it for you.
all right, we'll I'll when we post this on the site, let me look through the book, see what the chapters are. I'll decide if we'll split it into two. We'll just finish part 3. I'll when we post on the site, I'll have the chapters we'll go to, and I'll post it on the Reddit and the Twitter as well. That sound good?
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. Do you have any other closing thoughts here as we head into the final stretch of part 3?
No, I'm excited to keep this thing rolling and hope everybody's enjoying.
Yeah, so we'll be diving back into this now. Did want to shout out some guys on the Reddit before we go. Fixer, once again, you came in pretty clutch with the epigraphs all kind of grouped together. The Moash and the Adolin pronunciation, Moash and Adolin. And I was right. The J in Yakovet is a Y.
Okay.
Um, so there's some things there. Also, some of these pictures were really cool. The Shallan with the symbol heads one looks they look way less like demons than I had imagined in my head. I feel like this picture makes them look a little bit like benevolent,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't know if it's right. Maybe I just read into it wrong. Um, but appreciate you sharing all those the images every week. They're really cool to look at, and especially when you keep them relevant to the chapters we've been reading too. So certainly appreciate that. Um, yeah, and some people mentioned like regarding the animation, like some people think Zap Zia, for example, said, personally, I would prefer animation since I don't think live action could satisfyingly pull off the world. But there are others who say that they just wouldn't watch animation at all. So, I totally understand that. Going to be some differences of opinion there. But, me personally, I think I would go either way. So just
Yeah,
wanted to
I think.
shout out some guys on the Reddit there.
Okay, yeah, I think I landed on animation, and I'm kind of gonna stick with that. But yeah, definitely appreciate the redditors and what they've been doing.
Yeah, Reddit guy 628 said that last week was one of his favorite episodes so far. So I hope we keep the streak going and make, hopefully this week is one of your favorites too. As we continue reading here, I think I get the most jazzed up when we like finish and close a part. So, these next couple weeks as like more things are revealed, me and Tom will definitely be able to talk a little bit more in wider aspects for you guys, what we think is, happening in the story. So keep an eye out for next week. I'll post what chapters we'll be reading. Um, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, feel free to keep commenting on the Reddit. Keep supplying your own questions. We'll definitely go over them as we do the podcast and, shout you guys out and help drive discussion that way as we recap and react to the chapters. So keep doing that. And, until next time, it's been a pleasure. Tom, any closing thoughts?
Uh, a pod has no name out.
That's right.